That bagel you toasted this morning. The one with the cream cheese still melting into it while you rushed out the door. The one you grabbed off the shelf because the bag said New York style or kettle boiled or artisan right there in bold letters on the front. You assume that meant something real. Flour, water, yeast, salt, boil, then bake. That is what a bagel has been for over 100 years. That is the entire recipe, and it is never actually needed to be more complicated than that. Most of what is sitting in the bread aisle and the freezer section of your grocery store right now is not that. It is a bread product shaped into a ring, engineered from the ground up to survive weeks inside a sealed plastic bag without ever going hard, without ever molding, without ever looking like anything other than the day it was packaged. It is loaded with dough conditioners, emulsifiers, and preservatives that most people could not pronounce out loud if you handed them the wrapper and asked them to try right there in the store. We pulled the ingredient labels off 10 of the biggest bagel brands sold across America. We read every single line on every single bag. No skimming, no assuming. Some of what we found is completely legal and completely standard for industrial baking in this country. Some of it is restricted, watched, or outright avoided in other parts of the world. And a few of these brands are hiding behind decades of nostalgia and trust that the ingredient panel simply does not support anymore. By the time we get through this entire list, you are going to look at the bagel bag sitting in your own kitchen in a completely different way. We are counting down from the least concerning to the most concerning, and at the very end I am going to hand you 4 options that are actually doing this the right way, including one you can make yourself for pennies. Let's get into it. Number 10. Thomas. Plain bagels. Thomas has been sitting on American breakfast tables for generations, long enough that most people have never once stopped to question it. The name feels like an institution before you even open the bag. That old-fashioned script running across the packaging, the warm orange and white color scheme, all of it gives off a since 1880 energy even in places where that founding date is not printed anywhere on the label itself. This is the bagel your parents bought. This is the bagel that has simply always been there in the bread aisle, unquestioned, unread, tossed into the cart out of pure habit, the same way it has been for 30 or 40 years in some households. Flip the bag over and read the very first ingredient listed: enriched flour. That single word enriched is doing a lot of quiet work. It means the wheat kernel was stripped of its natural bran in germ during industrial processing, the exact parts that carry most of the fiber and the naturally occurring nutrients. And then the flour was artificially fortified afterward with synthetic versions of a handful of those nutrients to meet a bare minimum legal standard. It is not whole wheat pretending to be something healthier than it actually is. And to be fair to Thomas, the brand is not lying about that particular point on the label. But keep reading past the flour and you hit the dough conditioners almost immediately. Mono and diglycerides. DOTM, which stands for diacetyl tartaric acid esters of monoglycerides, a mouthful of a name for a compound that exists for one specific purpose. These conditioners make industrial dough behave predictably on a high-speed factory line running 24 hours a day, and they extend shelf stability so that a bagel actually baked 2 or 3 weeks ago still looks soft pale and fresh sitting in the bag on the store shelf today. Thomas is not the worst brand on this entire list by any real measure, but it is the clearest possible example of how the bagel your whole family has trusted without a second thought for decades quietly turned into a chemistry lab product somewhere along the way, without anyone ever announcing that the recipe underneath the familiar packaging had changed. Number 9. Trader Joe's Everything Bagels. Trader Joe's has spent years building its entire identity around being the one grocery store that reads the ingredient label for you, so that you never have to. No artificial colors allowed on their private label shelves. No high-fructose corn syrup hiding inside their house brand products. People specifically choose to shop there because they have effectively outsourced all of that label reading anxiety to a company they have already decided, in advance, to trust completely and without much further scrutiny. The Everything Bagel ingredient list here is actually refreshingly short, and that deserves real credit. Flour, water, yeast, salt, malt, and the seasoning blend on top. No datum hiding anywhere in that list. No mystery conditioners padding it out. That is a genuinely good sign compared to almost everything else on this countdown. But look a little closer at the seasoning packet itself. The part that gets listed separately from the dough on the back of the bag. It includes the word spices used as a catch-all term. one that tells you absolutely nothing specific about what is actually blended into that topping. And the sodium content per bagel here comes in noticeably higher than most of the so-called unhealthy mass-market brands further down this list, almost entirely because of the everything topping itself rather than anything happening inside the dough. A single bagel from this line can carry close to a third of an entire day's recommended sodium intake before you have even reached for the cream cheese or the lox. Trader Joe's earns real, legitimate credit for the base dough here, but healthy grocery store does not automatically translate into healthy bagel, and the sodium math on this particular product is worth actually knowing before you casually eat 2 of these in one sitting on a Saturday morning. Number 8. Panera Bread Plain Bagels. Panera spent well over a decade building its entire marketing identity around the idea of clean food around a publicly published no list of ingredients the company claims to refuse to use anywhere in its menu, around the broader promise of real recognizable food you could trust coming from an actual counter instead of an anonymous factory floor somewhere. That promise is the entire reason people are willing to pay bakery cafe prices for a single bagel instead of grabbing one off a grocery store shelf for a fraction of that cost on the way home. Panera's bagel ingredient list does genuinely hold up better than most grocery aisle and gas station competitors sitting on this list. No high fructose corn syrup appears on their published ingredient sheet. No artificial preservatives listed there either. That is a real point in their favor, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. But the sugar content per bagel here is notably higher than what you would expect from a traditional New York-style bagel, closer in profile to what you would find in an actual dessert bread than in a savory breakfast staple meant to hold cream cheese and lox. A cinnamon crunch bagel or a blueberry bagel off this exact menu can carry as much added sugar as some of the actual cookies sold at that same counter, sitting just a few feet away in the display case. You walked in that morning thinking you were buying bakery fresh bread. What you very often walked out with instead was a bread product carefully formulated to taste like a treat, while being priced and marketed like the responsible, health-conscious choice on the menu. Number 7. Lender's Bagels. Lender's is the bagel that most Americans actually grew up eating without ever really thinking about it. That familiar orange bag sitting in the freezer section. The brand that basically introduced the entire concept of frozen bagels to the mass market decades before any competitor figured out how to do it at that same industrial scale. Familiarity is the entire product here, and it always has been. Nobody questions Lender's. It has just always been the bagel, the reliable default, the one nobody thinks twice about tossing into the freezer cart week after week for years. The ingredient label tells a very different story than nostalgia does, though. Enriched flour, high fructose corn syrup, and a preservative list that includes calcium propionate, an anti-mold agent specifically used to keep the product looking fresh and untouched far longer than a normal bagel would naturally manage on its own. Calcium propionate is approved by the FDA and is genuinely widespread across commercial bread products sold throughout the United States. But it has also been the subject of independent research examining possible links to behavioral changes in children when consumed in higher cumulative amounts, research that has not fully settled the question either way, but has been enough evidence to push several European countries toward restricting its use in certain categories of baked goods sold there. Lender's is not doing anything illegal here, and nobody is suggesting otherwise. It is simply doing exactly what a mass-market frozen bagel brand is engineered from top to bottom to do. Maximize shelf life. Minimize production cost. Keep the price point low enough that a family buys the exact same bag every single week for years without ever once reading past the brand name printed on the front of it. Number 6. The unbranded and lightly branded frozen bagel multi-packs sitting on the bottom shelf of the freezer aisle in nearly every regional grocery chain across the country. This is really more of an entire category than a single named brand. No heritage story printed anywhere on the bag. No mascot. No decades of television advertising behind it. Just a clear plastic bag? A price so low it barely registers on your total at checkout. And the word bagel printed in plain block type with nothing else to distinguish it. These products are almost always built around the cheapest possible formulation the category legally allows. Enriched flour, soybean oil, high fructose corn syrup, or corn syrup solid standing in for a real malt boil. And a dough conditioner blend designed purely to keep the finished product shelf-stable for months at a time rather than the few days a real bagel would naturally last. There is no brand reputation on the line here at all, which means there is very little financial incentive left to spend money improving the formula in any meaningful way. The math is simple, and honestly a little bit brutal when you sit with it. The cheaper the bagel, the more room there is in the profit margin for fillers and shortcuts. Because nobody is standing there watching that ingredient label except you right now in the freezer aisle, deciding whether tonight is the night you actually flip the bag over. Number 5. Einstein Bros. Bagels. Specifically the packaged grocery retail line, not the actual cafe experience. Einstein Bros. Built its entire brand around the in-store bakery, feeling the smell of real bagels boiling and baking right there behind the counter while you wait in line. The sense that this is closer to an authentic New York deli experience than anything you would ever find pre-packaged and sitting in a bag. That experience is genuine inside their actual cafe locations. The grocery store version of an Einstein Brothers bagel is an entirely different product, engineered for mass distribution and long shelf storage rather than for same-day sale to a customer standing right there at the counter. The retail packaged version lists dough conditioners and preservatives that simply do not appear anywhere in the fresh in-store product. Because a bagel that has to survive a long truck ride, then sit in a distribution warehouse, then spend several more weeks on a store shelf has an entirely different set of engineering requirements than one that gets boiled, baked, and sold the exact same morning to a walk-in customer. The name printed on the bag is completely identical in both cases. The bagel actually sitting inside that bag is not remotely the same bagel. That gap between the brand experience you remember fondly from the cafe and the industrial product now quietly carrying that same name in the frozen food aisle of your grocery store is exactly the kind of quiet substitution that is incredibly easy to miss if you are shopping purely on brand recognition and nostalgia rather than actually reading the label in front of you. Number 4. Bagel Bites Frozen Snacks, specifically the bagel base sitting underneath all the pizza toppings. This is not a traditional standalone grocery bagel by any stretch, but it earns a spot on this list because it happens to be one of the most common ways kids across this entire country actually consume bagel product on a weekly basis. And the bagel base underneath the toppings gets almost zero scrutiny from anyone because the entire conversation around this product has always been about the cheese blend and the sauce sitting on top of it. The bagel component itself is built from enriched flour, oil, sugar, and a stabilizer blend specifically designed to survive freezing, then microwaving or baking without falling apart or turning soggy in the process. That is a genuinely different engineering problem than baking a fresh bagel from scratch. And it gets solved almost entirely through additives rather than through any actual technique, fermentation time, or traditional boiling method. Parents scrutinize the pepperoni closely. Parents scrutinize the cheese blend closely. Almost nobody ever actually reads the ingredient label on the bread base holding the entire snack together because it does not feel like the bagel in this particular product. It feels like a passive vehicle for the topping sitting on top of it. It is still, quietly, the very first ingredient your kid is actually eating every single time. If you have made it this far into the list, you have probably already mentally walked over to your own freezer to check what is sitting in there right now. Subscribe to the Hidden Receipt right now because we do exactly this every single week, pulling ingredient labels apart brand by brand so that you never have to stand there yourself in a grocery aisle squinting at fine print while people wait behind you with their carts. We have 5 more brands left to get through on this list, and the next one is a bagel shop chain that most people walking into it automatically assume is the healthy option in the entire category. Number 3. St. Pierre Bagel Rounds. In the broader brioche-style bagel trend that has genuinely taken over grocery shelves across the country over the last several years. This entire product category was marketed from day one as a premium, more indulgent option, softer texture, slightly sweet flavor profile, bakery quality language printed across every inch of the packaging. People pay a real, noticeable premium for these compared to a standard bagged bagel sitting one shelf over in the exact same aisle. Brioche-style dough by its own long-standing traditional definition requires real butter and real eggs in fairly significant quantity because that specific enrichment is exactly what makes brioche taste and feel like brioche in the first place. Going back centuries, the mass-produced grocery version of this trend achieves that same soft, rich texture using vegetable oils, emulsifiers, and sugar instead of the traditional enrichment. Because butter and eggs at that kind of massive production scale would be far more expensive and far less shelf-stable across a multi-week distribution window stretching across the entire country. You are paying a genuine premium price for a premium-sounding texture that is frequently achieved, with cheaper industrial substitutes standing in for the actual ingredients the entire style is historically named after. Number 2. Wonder Bagels. Wonder spent generations building the entire classic American bread identity that turned Wonder Bread into a household name across the country. And it carried that exact same brand equity directly into the bagel category the moment this line launched onto shelves. The colorful dot logo, the wrapper design, the unmistakable nostalgia that hits the second you spot it sitting on a shelf, all of it transfers over instantly and automatically. And that instant transfer of trust is the entire point of putting that specific name on a bagel in the first place. Wonder's bagel ingredient list includes enriched bleached flour. Bleaching is actually a separate chemical process from enrichment itself, using specific agents to whiten the flour rapidly and speed up the overall processing timeline at an industrial scale. Alongside that sit preservatives and dough conditioners fully consistent with the rest of Wonder's packaged bread lineup across every other product they sell. This is a company with decades upon decades of practiced experience engineering bread specifically for maximum shelf life and minimum production cost at a genuinely massive retail scale, and the bagel line reflects that exact same playbook ingredient for ingredient, almost without deviation. It looks like a bagel sitting in the bag on the shelf. It is built with the exact same industrial logic as a $2 loaf of sandwich bread that simply happens to be shaped into a ring instead of a rectangle. Number 1. Ultra Discount and Dollar Store Bagel Multipacks. This is the absolute bottom of the entire category, and it is not particularly close. 6 or 8 bagels crammed into a single bag for a price that barely covers the cost of the plastic wrapped around them. No brand story attached anywhere. Sometimes barely even a real identifiable brand name printed on the packaging at all, just the plain word bagels, in block letters on a clear bag sitting on the deepest discount shelf of a dollar store, or tucked into the very back corner of a grocery chain's bread aisle where nobody usually looks twice. At that price point, there is essentially zero room left in the margin for real dough time, real fermentation, or any semblance of a clean ingredient list. These products are built from the cheapest available enriched flour on the market, the cheapest available oils, and the maximum allowable preservative load the category legally permits. Because the entire business model behind this specific product depends completely on volume and extended shelf life rather than on quality of any kind. There is no brand reputation here to protect, and there is no ongoing customer relationship to maintain beyond the single, anonymous transaction at the register. When there is nothing meaningfully at stake for the company selling it, there is very little remaining incentive to spend even a single extra cent on the actual bagel sitting inside that bagel. That is the full list. 10 brands, one single pattern repeating itself over and over again from the top of the countdown to the bottom. Enriched flour standing in for real fermentation time. Dough conditioners standing in for a proper, patient rest period. Preservatives standing in for a shorter, more honestly priced shelf life that most companies have simply decided consumers will not accept anymore. Before we get to what is actually worth buying instead, here is something you can go do with the bag sitting in your own kitchen tonight, without needing a laboratory, a certification, or any special equipment at all. Start with the label test. Flick the bag over right now and actually read every single line printed on it. A real, traditionally made bagel needs roughly 5 ingredients total: flour, water, yeast, salt, and malt, or a small amount of sweetener to help the boil and properly build the crust. If your ingredient list runs past 8 or 10 separate items, and several of those items are words you would genuinely never find sitting anywhere in your own kitchen, you are no longer looking at a bagel in the traditional sense of that word. You are looking at a bread product that was engineered from the very beginning for a supply chain, not for a person standing at a breakfast table. Then run the texture test yourself. Press the bagel gently with one finger. A real bagel, boiled properly and then baked the traditional way, has a dense, chewy crumb that genuinely resists your finger and springs back slowly and somewhat unevenly. If it compresses instantly like a soft dinner roll and bounces right back to its exact original shape immediately, that instant spring is a strong sign that dough conditioners are quietly doing the work that time and proper baking technique are actually supposed to be doing instead. Finally, run the shelf life test. Real bagels made without heavy preservatives start going noticeably stale within just a few days sitting at room temperature, and they genuinely need to be refrigerated or frozen if you want to keep them fresh any longer than that short window. If a bagel has been sitting in its bag on your kitchen counter for 2 or 3 full weeks, and it still looks and feels exactly the same as the day you bought it, unchanged, unmoved, still soft, it is worth honestly asking yourself what exactly is keeping it that way for that long. Now, 4 options that are actually doing this the right way, starting from the most accessible and working toward the most involved. The first good pick is a Bagel out of New York City. A genuine New York deli bagel shop still hand-rolled to this day by actual bakers, still boiled in real kettles before baking. Made the exact same way this entire style has been made for well over a century now without shortcuts. The ingredient list is exactly what it should be, nothing more and nothing less. Flour, water, yeast, salt, malt. Available in person if you are in New York, and shipped frozen nationally if you happen to live anywhere else in the country. It costs noticeably more per bagel than anything sitting on the avoid list we just walked through. It should cost more. You are paying for actual boiling water and actual patient time, not for a chemistry set quietly standing in for both of those things. The second good pick is not really a single national brand at all. It is a broader category worth seeking out wherever you happen to live. Fairmount Bagel, or honestly any genuine, independent local bagel bakery operating near you. These are the kinds of places that still boil and bake fresh every single day, that sell out daily precisely because the product was never designed to sit around waiting for a buyer, and that do not need a single shelf life additive because nobody walking in the door expects that bagel to still be sitting there a week later. Check the ingredient list if the shop happens to post one anywhere, or better yet, just ask the person standing behind the counter what is actually in the dough that day. A real, honest bakery can answer that specific question in one confident sentence without needing to go check a corporate label first. The third good pick is the organic bagel line from Dave's Killer Bread, though it is worth reading the label carefully rather than assuming based on the packaging alone. That specific organic line does list a genuinely shorter, cleaner ingredient panel than most of the grocery aisle competitors we just walked through together on this list. Organic flour, water, yeast, and a noticeably shorter dough conditioner list compared to the conventional grocery brands sitting on the avoid side of this countdown. It is not artisan bakery level minimal by any stretch, and it remains at the end of the day a mass-produced product moving through a large industrial supply chain. But relative to the far more ultra-processed end of this entire category, it represents a meaningfully cleaner option sitting in that exact same grocery store freezer aisle right next to everything else we just covered. The fourth good pick, and honestly the most reliable one of all, is simply making your own at home. Flour, water, yeast, salt, and a spoonful of malt syrup or honey stirred into the boiling water. Mix the dough by hand or with a stand mixer, knead it properly. Let it rise for about an hour, shape it into rings. Boil each one for roughly a minute per side in water with the malt or honey dissolved into it. Then bake until deeply golden on top. The total ingredient cost here comes out to a small fraction of what you would pay for a single premium bag at the grocery store, and you will know with complete and total certainty exactly what went into every single bagel you eat that week. It takes a couple of hours from start to finish, and most of that time is simply spent waiting around for the dough to rise quietly on its own on the counter. Here's the one rule genuinely worth keeping the next time you find yourself standing in any bread aisle anywhere in the country. Flip the bag before it goes into your cart. Count the ingredients printed on the back panel. If you cannot picture yourself actually making that exact product at home with what is listed there in front of you, ask yourself honestly why it needed to be added to the bag at all in the first place. If this changed the way you were going to shop for something as simple as a bagel, hit the like button right now before you scroll away. And tell me down in the comments which one of these 10 brands was sitting in your own freezer before you started watching this video. Subscribe to the Hidden Receipt so that you catch it every single time we open up another label that nobody else out there is actually bothering to read closely. Stay sharp, read the back of the bag before the front of it, and I will see you in the next one.